The offensive line will be just fine without Connor Riley.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. We got a great episode for you today. We're going to talk some Kansas State football. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Check out FanDuel.com for more details. Well, we got some new coaching changes that have come into Kansas State football so far this offseason. We haven't had a chance to talk about all of them yet on this show. We're going to dig into the offensive line coach on this one. That's the next step for us here on this show. So do me a favor, click that like, click that subscribe, join in on the conversation below, leave your comments on your thoughts on this episode and what you think about the offensive line heading into 2025, because that's what I really want to ask the question and really get your thoughts. And I'm going to let mine obviously roll on this episode today. But I think the offensive line is in a good spot. I think heading into the new year, heading into 2025, although there's some changes that happened to the coaching staff, I feel very optimistic and very good. Obviously, Connor Riley leaving to go to the Dallas Cowboys to take the offensive line coach. He no longer will be the offensive coordinator nor the offensive line coach for Kansas State in 2025. They go ahead and promote and move on. Well, they move into Brian Lepak becoming the offensive line coach. He was the tight end coach last season. He takes that next step forward. Now, a lot of people think that not only was he more than qualified to take the job, but if he did not get something like this promotion, he probably was going to go elsewhere because he was a well-wanted man in the eyes of many other college programs across the nation, across the NCAA. Brian Lepak has showed a great amount of excitement being in charge of the tight end group. I mean, the tight end group was one of the best in the country. It was the best in the country when it came to scoring touchdowns. But what he has done with that, and just for example, what he did with a guy like Ben Sinnett, who came from a walk-on to getting drafted by the Washington Commanders just last season, is a pretty exciting thing under his realm. Now he's going to go ahead and take over the offensive line, one that has a big role, there's no doubt about it, on Kansas State's offense, but also comes with a great sense of pride as well for Kansas State. I think there's a great sense, a great big feeling about how people feel about this offensive line. Last season, I don't know if it lived up to the expectations, although they did win some awards last year, but it didn't live up to exactly what they wanted that compared to past offensive lines, shall you say, with Cooper Beebe, if you will, and in the past. Now, there are some new changes to the offensive line, not only with the coaching staff, but players as well. We're going to get to that later on in this show. But what I really want to get to first is just talking about Lepak, while I think he's going to be a great spot, while I think he's going to fit the role of offensive line coach really well at Kansas State. Now, for the record, this isn't the first time he's an offensive line coach. He did it in his last program when he was with Southern. He played the position as well at a Division I level. He was played offensive line at Colorado State and Oklahoma. So he knows the position. And tight end is the closest to the offensive line when you get to coaching as well. That is a direct path of promotion, if you will, that we have seen in the past. And that's nothing new, not just to Kansas State. That's kind of like a college football wide kind of concept. He had some early coaching career stops in Indiana, Oklahoma, as we mentioned, he played and coached for the Sooners. And then before hitting the Kansas State, he was the O-line coach for Southern. I think he's going to fit in just fine. The biggest question is, can he help make this offensive line take that next step forward and really get back to being that premier type of offensive line that this team needs to make sure that they are a Big 12 contender. I think he has what it takes. I think he has the right people around him to make sure that's the case as well. And I think the coaching staff that he is bringing along and the rest of the program is helping him build across, of course, is also going to help. Former Wildcat player Drew Little has also been promoted to the assistant offensive line coach. In 2024, he was an offensive analyst for K-State, obviously played for the Wildcats. So having that in the room as well, I think is going to be huge. Now, he was the tight end coach. What does that mean for recruiting moving forward? Obviously, he had a big role in grabbing Lincoln Kaczor. Now, it's not just the money, although we have seen that some of the top players in Kansas State are now receiving top 25 NIL rankings. For example, Avery Johnson, they just came out with an On3 NIL ranking. Avery Johnson is ranked tied for 24th in the country with the most NIL earnings at $1.8 million. There are only 23 players that are making more money in the entire country than Avery Johnson right now. So although that is something that comes into play, and that's not going away anytime soon with this new transfer portal, with this new NIL, with all this new money coming into college football, it wasn't the only reason that Lincoln Kaczor stayed. It was the culture of this team. It was the fact that he made some good relationships. And you have to expect a guy like Brian Lepak was one of those big reasons when he was the tight end coach. Him moving to offensive line coach, I don't see that changing too much of a relationship with a guy like Lincoln Kaczor. And we're going to talk about Luke Wells later on this week, him becoming the new tight end coach. I think that's only going to make it more exciting for that group heading into 2025 and beyond. I think we are really in for a good feeling for the tight end room moving forward. But offensive line, I mean, it's to me, and I feel like I'm probably not the only person that feels this. Offensive line is truly the unsung heroes of the entire team, not just the offense, not just the defense, but they are usually forgotten about. And not as much with Kansas State, because we do like our offensive linemen, but it's still one of those positions that are not talked about enough. And last year, there were some games, some offensive drives, if you will, that were stalled because of the offensive line, not because of Avery Johnson or the weapons or DJ Giddens or whatever the case may be, that really changed the game, that hurt Kansas State from potentially getting to the Big 12 championship game and potentially to a college football playoffs in the first year of the 12-team run. Is that going to change in 2025? I truly hope so, and I do think that there are some nice transfers that are going to help us get there. And there's some returning starters as well. I think there's a good mesh of players, of offensive linemen that can get us to 2025 in a good spot. Although we did lose players to go in the transfer portal, we did lose some other players because of eligibility. I think the offensive line for Kansas State is in a really good spot. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about who's returning, what the potential starting offensive line could look like. And of course, let's talk about some of these transfers that are just coming in, because some of these transfers could be day one starters, especially after what happens come spring. Let's talk about that right here on Locked On Kansas State. March basketball is here, and there's no better way to get in action than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With PrizePicks, you pick more or less on at least two players' projections, and if you're right, you can win money, baby. You can win 1,000 times your cash. It's fast, it's easy, and it keeps every game exciting. I love how you can make my picks in less than 60 seconds and stay engaged all game long. And on Tuesdays, they got promos. Talk about Taco Tuesday. Yeah, they got promos like that where you get discounted player projections for even more value. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's Locked On College, all one word, for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. And welcome back, and thank you for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Basketball with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. Don't wait for March. Be the most informed college basketball fan now on Locked On College Basketball. You can find it on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're talking about the offensive line coach, Brian Lepak, that was just promoted from tight end coach just a few weeks ago, and what that means for the offensive line in 2025. Obviously, a huge step forward with Connor Riley moving on to the Dallas Cowboys. What does that mean? We talked about the offensive coordinator position of Matt Wells taking over, how I think that is a good idea. If you want to check that out, it was on a past episode that came out last week. So check that out on the podcast feed or on YouTube as well. I'll also post it in the show notes, and you can click that link for easier access. But the next I want to get to is just kind of talking about the offensive line and where it sits right now. First, what I have heard and what has been across the media wires, if you will, is the hire of Lepak has been very well received in the locker room, especially with the offensive line room, and that is obviously huge. Knowing that you already have those type of players behind you heading into the offseason, heading into spring, and obviously remotely heading into Dublin. So that is exciting. He's very well respected on the team. Of course, what he's done with the tight end room shows that he has what it takes to coach at this Power 4 level. And I think him moving up to the offensive line coach, what we saw with Connor Riley, for example, taking a, dare I say, near lateral move from Kansas State to the Dallas Cowboys, taking over as the offensive line coach in Brian Schottenheimer's new Dallas Cowboys coaching squad. I think it's a huge opportunity for Lepak to also make a big impact in his career. This could be a launching point for him. Now, although as a Kansas State Wildcat fan, you would love to just keep these coaches and bulk up all the expertise and greatness as you will with these position coaches, but that's just not how this works out. You get them for a short amount of time. If they succeed, they move on. If they aren't doing a good job, that's usually when they either are promoted, let go, or kind of sit put if they're just fans of the coaching staff or something like that. But the best case scenario, unfortunately, is for Lepak to do good for about 2 to 3 years and find himself as potentially an offensive coordinator. Maybe that's with Kansas State in the future. Who knows what happens moving forward if Matt Wells gets another head coaching job, an opportunity, if you will, or he finds a spot somewhere else. As we already mentioned it earlier in the show, he is a well-wanted man in the realm of college football. He decided to stay with Kansas State, and that's a really good thing. We need to take advantage of that right now, this second. But looking at this offensive line, and because I think that is obviously a really important thing to look at right now, you bring back a decent amount of returning starters, returning players, if you will. And the biggest one, obviously, Taylor Poitier, who comes back as right guard. He gets a waiver, and he's going to play back. Assume that he's going to be the starting right guard in 2025, assuming he stays healthy and he can play another year in the Chris Kleiman coaching staff. He will continue to be with Chris Kleiman since he has been with Kansas State, the only player who has been here that long. You also have guys like Legang, Heck. There's some really interesting players that are going to help solidify mainly the interior offensive line for the new offensive line coach, which is great. And then you have transfers. And these transfers, I think, could make immediate impacts right away, might actually compete with some of those players I just mentioned earlier for starting positions. And that's exactly what you want, especially in spring ball. You don't want those transfers after you just went and changed the coaching staff after the transfers committed. Now, we don't know how much Lepak was in ties with talking to some of these players when it came to the transfer portal. We're not sure that if this kind of conversation of him potentially taking this job was behind the scenes, so he maybe did have some say in it. I'm doubting that because he might have been working his own case. He might have been working some other things. Who knows? They did not bring in a tight end during the transfer portal, so maybe he was working hard and helping with the offensive line. Not sure. I don't have that answer. I don't know if we will have that answer. However, the last thing that you want is for these transfer offensive linemen. There's 3 of them. You have George Fitzpatrick, you have Brandon Snee, and you have Amos Talalele. 2 of them on offensive tackles, and you have Talalele as a potential interior offensive lineman, most likely a guard. As of right now, I would say he's probably battling with Poitier to be the starting right guard. But what you don't want is you don't want them to come in the spring ball and feel like they are not making an impact right away. Because unfortunately, they can go ahead and enter the transfer portal again in that spring window, and then you're in a tough situation. There are going to be players. There is no doubt about it, folks. There are going to be players that leave in spring. Because as of right now, to my count, we are at 128 players on the roster. We have to be at 105 before we kick off in Dublin, really before fall camp. And to be honest, knowing what we know of Coach Kleiman and his staff, I feel like he's going to have some respect to a regard to what he best can on his football team, to the players that he's going to have to let move on and have them enter as early as possible to help them land somewhere else. And obviously, it's going to go 2 ways. They're going to also look in the transfer portal to improve before they play Iowa State on week 0 as well. With that being said, those 3 players that came in the transfer portal, you don't want to lose them. They're all really exciting players. And also, we're hearing some things. I'm hearing it on message boards. You can check it out. I think On3 had this on their message board as well. Some of the transfers that are already on campus, like George Fitzpatrick and Amos Talalele, are showing like some of this really exciting things already. People are already hearing really good buzz about those transfers, especially those 2 offensive linemen. Now, that doesn't talk about them on pads and anything. That's more off-field activities. That's them in the weight room. That's them showing leadership. That's them showing, just all the tangibles that you look for other than actually playing football. They're willing to learn their plays, they're reviewing film, whatever the case may be. But if you're already hearing that type of buzz and those are the names that you're hearing, that's an exciting thing for this offensive line that needs to take a step forward if they want to compete for the Big 12 championship and make a college football playoff appearance in 2025. And you get to hear 2 of those names. That's a great feeling. Now, I guess I'm not surprised to hear George Fitzpatrick and Amos Talalele's name as some of these names, because they're coming from prestigious schools heading over to here. So this type of workout programs is probably not new to them. It's probably second nature. Fitzpatrick coming from Ohio State, Talalele coming from USC, already bringing in that type of mentality. And hopefully that's contagious. Because I'm not saying Kansas State isn't one of those teams that is a put it in your nose, smash mouth football kind of team, because they are. I mean, look what DJ Giddens did last year, broke a school record for most average yards per carry. But adding just even more, putting more on top. There's no better Sunday than an extra cherry, folks. There's no better Sunday. So give me that all day. Give me that every single day. Give me more of the buzz, even if it's just off-season buzz. I want to hear all about it, especially if it's some of these offensive linemen that we got in the transfer portal. There's some more changes that came to Kansas State's coaching staff. Let's get to that as we wrap up this episode right here at Locked On Kansas State. And thanks for listening to Locked On Kansas State. Thanks for making me your first listen of the day. Please do me a favor. Click that like, click that subscribe. If you're listening in audio form, do me a favor and click 5 stars and download wherever you're listening. It does wonders, folks. We are very close to getting to 700 subscribers on the YouTube channel. How crazy is that? We just started. It feels like we just started yesterday, and we are already cooking. We are very close to 1,000 subscribers. I'm sure we're going to get there very soon. And I thank you so much for just sticking with me and having a blast talking Kansas State Wildcats, because it is certainly a blast over here. And I love having a conversation with all of you on either YouTube comments or if you now follow the new Twitter account at Locked On K-State. So thank you so much for that. So not only is this the only coaching change that happened, obviously we mentioned the offensive coordinator with Matt Wells. We're going to talk later on in the week about the new tight end coach and Luke Wells. And then, of course, Brian Lepak and promoting with his assistant line coach promoting as well. Why is the name escaping me as we're talking right now? It will get back to me. But when there's also a couple other names that have been promoted with Kansas State. Drew Little, excuse me. I'm so sorry. Drew Little, former Wildcats player, promoted to assistant line coach as well. All these different names getting me together. So apologize about that. But there have also been some promotions as well on the coaching staff, 4 more across the entire football coaching staff. Chris Kleiman announced on Tuesday that there are new titles for 4 coaching staffs for the members of the staff for the 2025 season. Nate Kaczor is now going to be the special teams coordinator. That's huge. Special teams assistant to the head coach as well. Matt Cordelis is going to be the assistant safeties coach. Sean Maguire is now going to be the assistant's QB coach. And David Orloff is the outside linebackers coach now, not assistant. He will be the outside linebackers coach. Chris Kleiman was quoted as, quote, "Each of these coaches provide tremendous value to our staff, and we have been fortunate to add a secondary assistant at numerous positions. They provide great support not only on the field, but they serve important functions in recruiting as well." The second part of that I want to focus on because that is absolutely huge. One, first, getting an assistant to a position group is great because you get another conversation, another ear, another mouth, if you will, in leading that group. An assistant quarterback coach, for example, one more motivator, one more mentor for a guy like Avery Johnson, for an amazing quarterback room where I think we're going to have a potentially quarterback 2 competition this season. I think that deserves an episode. We're going to probably have to have that this year or very soon. But the recruiting part is interesting to me. And I feel like he didn't just say that for no reason. I think that he just, I'm sure the quote came naturally, but there's a reason that he focused on important functions in recruiting as well. We are at a stage right now where, well, I'm going to go back to it. The momentum is super high for Kansas State. And it all started with the Rape Bowl win, and then the National Signing Day, then the transfer portal. And then these, to me, I think these hires help with the momentum as well. I think you're going to see some great performances by some players at the NFL Combine coming this week. And knowing that they are former Kansas State players, I think that's only going to help the momentum for recruiting. We're going to talk about the Combine later on this week, by the way, as well. But with that being said, you're entering a time right now for the 2026 class where we're starting to hear some offers, some official visits being put out on social media. You can check some of those out at Locked On K-State. I've been retweeting some of the players. If you want to find out who is about to take some official visits in either May or June, we're going to talk about those players on the show in the coming weeks as well. March is going to be a huge month, folks. March is going to be huge. But if those assistant coaches can also help with recruiting, and maybe that becomes one of their primary focuses in the offseason, that leaves the primary position coach with all eyes on the prize. And that's the Big 12 championship. The college football playoffs, to me, yes, that's great. We're going to get there. But I think you got to reclaim your throne from 2022. And obviously, if you win the Big 12, you make it into the college football playoffs. There's automatic bids as of now. But I think the priority, if they were separate, and I'm probably going to be in the minority for this, if they were separate, I think the priority is winning back that Big 12 title. You can focus on recruiting for the years moving forward and still focus on the prize at hand without having to bat an eye because you have some assistant coaches like that. That's a huge thing. I'm really excited for that. Kaczor, the special teams, we kind of had a feeling that there's going to be some moves with special teams after what happened in the offseason. He brings a lot of NFL experience. Now, he coached with the team in 2024. He was the special teams quality control coach. Now he takes over as special team coordinator, but he's a 16-year NFL veteran. He helped coach with Tennessee, Jacksonville, Tampa Bay, and Washington, all the way up through 2008 to 2023 until he came to Kansas State in 2024. So he's got a lot of NFL experience, and now he's bringing that to Kansas State. Special teams could take a nice step forward. And I think it's a perfect time for it because Dylan Edwards had a great special teams year. What he did, he ranked 4th in the country in punt return touchdowns, and he had 35th in combined kickoff returns and punt return yards. He was 43rd nationally in kickoff return average. This is all on the press release, by the way. I'm not sure if Dylan Edwards is going to continue being a primary special teams player because of his new role as running back 1. That might turn into a different type of role. That might turn into Lockett might be taking more of that role. Who knows what that case may be? Maybe a guy like Medford might step up, a transfer wide receiver. I don't know. But regardless of the case, it's going to be really exciting to see what Kaczor can do for Kansas State. I'm also really excited to see what Maguire does as the assistant quarterback coach. I kind of already mentioned it earlier, but having an extra ear for Avery Johnson, I talked about how I think that the new offensive coordinator, what he can do for Avery Johnson's future, what he did with Jordan Love as the head coach of Utah State, I think he can help unlock Avery Johnson even more. Having an extra guy like Maguire, who played quarterback at Florida State, played at a high level. He's been at different places already as well. He went to, he coached at Texas A&M, coached in the SEC. He also coached at University of Buffalo in the MAC. So he has different experience. Coaching, playing in the ACC, coaching in the MAC, coaching in the SEC, and now coaching in the Big 12. Bringing those types of different experiences into a Coach Kleiman offense who focuses on tight ends, who has a fast running back, who has some big size for wide receivers for a change. That's an exciting thing. That's a really exciting thing as well. Cardulis and Orloff, according to the release, are entering actually their 5th season with K-State. They each served their 4 years as defensive quality control coaches and defensive analysts. So they get a promotion after looks like some hard work in the system. So really cool what we see from this new coaching staff. Some promotions finally. We see some changes to some big names as offensive coordinator, offensive line coach, and tight end. As I mentioned, we're going to get to tight end coach and kind of talk about that as a whole in an episode down the road, probably next week, at the end of this week. Haven't decided. Depends on what goes on with basketball, to be honest with you. We got a loaded schedule coming up for Kansas State. As I mentioned, it's going to be an absolute huge march, folks. A huge march. So be sure to stick with us here at Locked On Kansas State. Be sure to hit subscribe. Hit that bell, that notification thing. I think that not only does it look cool, I think it actually notifies you to make sure that you're going to get episodes when they drop and you can hear them as soon as they do. Join the live premiere as well, because when we drop those, we're live. All right, folks, thank you so much. Be sure to like the video. Please subscribe. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.